right, so here we go. And now we're talking about kind of the formatting of tax research. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to resize this a little bit. Sorry. So our discussion of Chapter 2 will focus around this slide once I get it situated. All right, so this slide talks about the steps in the research process, and these are all really, really good steps, and it's a great visual. And the thing that I want you guys to focus on with this slide is that this is not a one-way process. This is an iterative process, okay? And so what that means is you're not just going to march through sequentially. You're going to have to go back, right? Because step 1 is establish the facts. And then step 2 is identify the issues. And as step 2 alludes, as you identify the issues, you may have to go back and ask for more facts, right? So what are some important facts? What type of tax entity are we talking about? What is their personal or family situation? Do we know what their legal citizenship is? Where is their legal domicile? What is the motivation for the transaction, right? All of these things that we're talking about involve some type of a transaction. Are the parties that are involved related in some way? Is there a special tax status? And this is a very important one. Is the transaction proposed or completed? All right, so hold on one second. Is the transaction open or closed? Okay, so open would be proposed, closed would be completed, okay? And we're going to find that those are two very different situations from the perspective of what can you do and what type of communication results, okay? This step 3, locate the authorities. This is a very, very important step, okay? And hopefully, by the time you're watching this, you have already looked at chapters 3, 4, and 5. Because what you found in chapters 3, 4, and 5, that there are 3 basic types of primary authority. There are statutory authorities. There are administrative authorities. And there are judicial authorities, okay? And so those are your primary authorities. Those are 99% of the time, those are your resources for tax research. Those are the things that you can cite. And we're going to spend a lot of time in this class talking about those, dissecting those, and figuring out the value of different examples of those. Okay. Step 4 is evaluate the authority. Okay, so what does that mean? So evaluate the authority. Now you have to look at what's the precedential value. How did the court decide what it decided? What were the reasons for that court decision? And do those reasons impact your situation? Okay. Then you're going to have to develop some conclusions and recommendations, okay? So lots of times you can give alternatives. Sometimes there is only one answer to a closed transaction, particularly. If it's an open transaction, then you can do an if this, then that, right? You can say, well, if we treat it as this type of transaction, then this is our conclusion. If, however, we do this type of transaction, then we have this outcome. So a lot of that depends on whether the transaction is open or closed. All right. And then the final step is communicate the recommendations. All right. This really is probably, I was going to say it's the most important step, but I'm going to rescind that because obviously you have to do good research and make sure that you find the appropriate answer and the appropriate authority. But a lot of situations can be made better or made less awkward if you have good communication, right? There are times when you are going to tell clients things they do not want to hear. You are going to tell them that the transaction that they've already completed is going to be treated a way that is not beneficial to them. But how you communicate that is going to, in some part, determine their reaction. Okay? So the next chapter that we talk about is all about how we communicate those recommendations. All right? So let's just head on that direction. All right? So communicating research results. All right, so let's talk about the file memo, okay? And so this is really going to be a pretty standard format, okay? And it's called the file memo here. It's also called a research memo, okay? And it's always in the same order, and it follows a very specific pattern, okay? So from a consistency perspective, that's a good thing, right? So the purpose of this document is to organize the facts, the issues, and the conclusions, and to give, to enable a good review of the research activities by your supervisor, okay? And so what you're going to do is you're going to do things in this order, right? And so the facts, issues, and conclusions are all going to be pretty succinct, okay? So this is going to be a fairly brief portion of the entire memo, okay? So let's talk about each one of these things in a little bit of detail, all right? So the facts, all right? So this is a brief summary of relevant facts. What does that mean? What that means is you are only going to include things that are important from a tax perspective. So actually, whoops. Hold on. Gotta erase that too. Get the wrong kind of pen there. So only include tax-related facts, okay? So if we're talking about a corporation and we're talking about a corporate transaction, then we don't really need a lot of personal details regarding individuals. If, however, we're dealing with an individual tax situation, then marital status, how old kids are, these types of things may be very important. So what we include in the facts is going to be dependent on our situation, but we want to keep this fairly brief, okay? Issues, all right? This is the next section. It's a list of tax issues being researched, okay? And so these are going to be numbered. Lots of times a research memo will contain more than one issue. So I'm going to move to the side here, okay? And we're going to talk about issues. All right? So the issues section, they're going to be numbered, all right? And each of these issues is going to be written as a single sentence, ideally, formatted as a question that could be answered yes or no. Okay? So, for example, you want to word your issues as a single sentence question. So, are startup costs deductible? Okay, so that could be one of your issues. And then your next issue would also have a number, and it would be listed as a single sentence question that's answerable yes or no. Okay? And we'll see how that flows. All right? So then the next section is your conclusion. Okay? Your conclusion is a one sentence answer to each of your issues. Okay? So if you have two issues, then you are going to have two conclusions. So you're going to have your issues section, and then you're going to have your conclusions section. All right? And they're going to correspond numerically to your issues. Are startup costs deductible? And then your conclusion would be yes, startup costs are deductible up to a certain amount. Okay, so you want a one sentence answer that starts either yes or no. Ideally, you want to answer your question yes. So ideally you would word your questions, your issues, as a question that could be answered yes. Okay? Clients like to see yes more than no. All right, so then each of your conclusions is going to be a one sentence answer to your issues. All right. Now, what do we see? So we've got this facts section that's designed to be fairly brief, right? Then you've got issues, which each issue is a single sentence. Your conclusion, each conclusion is also a single sentence, all right? Then you have your support section. This support section is going to take up the majority of the space in your research memo, okay? The support section is far and away the largest section of this memo. This is where you're actually going to cite all of the details of your primary sources. So if you're citing code sections, it goes here. If you're citing court cases, they go here, okay? You need to make sure you highlight the strengths and weaknesses of both sides of an argument. So you need to find court cases that agree and disagree, right? And we'll talk about this in class as well, because we're going to get the opportunity to do some research in our next class. All right. So the way this research memo is formatted tells us that this first section, right? If you go into your partner, so your partner gives you a research assignment and you do your research assignment, your partner can very quickly look at the facts, issues, and conclusions very quickly and get a feel for what is going on with this situation, all right? And then they can look at the support section and get all of the details, all right? That's why a file memo or a research memo is designed the way it's designed, okay? Now, let's talk about, a private letter ruling, okay? And the reason we're talking about a private letter ruling and the format is because it's a little bit different than your typical research memo, okay? Because this private letter ruling, you're doing a different thing. So typically with the research memo, you're communicating with the client. With a private letter ruling, this is a request to the IRS. All right, so you're sending this request directly to the IRS, and you're asking them for permission to do something that is an open transaction. So this has not transpired yet, but you're asking for permission. Now, I will post an example of a research memo and an example of a private letter ruling. Okay, so it's a somewhat similar document because you have a statement of facts. You're asking for a particular ruling, so this is kind of your issues section. And then you have your supporting authorities, which is like your support section, okay? And then you have your declarations. Your declarations are, for the most part, a boilerplate, formal portion of all of the legalities of who has power of attorney and where are you submitting the document to and who is the document relating to, okay? All right, so lots of our research is going to involve court cases, okay? And so court cases can be very, very useful to us. And one of the ways that court cases can be really useful to us is it's going to identify a code section, all right? It is important to realize that at the district and at the appellate court level, different states' courts are going to rule differently, all right? So that can be good or bad for us, but it's important to know that. They're going to, within that court case, tell you why they ruled the way they ruled and connect their ruling to facts and issues, which can be really, really helpful to you, okay? Often, there are concurring and dissenting opinions, and sometimes this dissenting opinion is incredibly helpful because that dissenting opinion, even if it's a case that does not agree with the treatment that your taxpayer wants, that dissenting agreement can sometimes help you formulate how you are different from this case that did not get decided the way you would want it to be decided, okay? A couple of things that it's important to know. Regulations. So when we talk about regulations, we're talking about Treasury regulations, okay? So those are referenced in chapters 3, 4, and 5, right? So Treasury regulations are seldomly held to be invalid, all right? So when we talk about citating things, which we will talk about, you don't have to worry about regulations so much, okay? Revenue rulings and revenue procedures, also primary authorities, but they are frequently modified or found invalid as the code changes, as courts change. So you want to be very, very careful with revenue rulings and revenue procedures, okay? Higher court decisions receive higher precedential weight, okay? So district courts and circuit courts, they only impact taxpayers in their jurisdictions, all right? That having been said, the Supreme Court, that is a national court, okay? Appellate courts also impact potentially different districts, okay? So it's important to know what you're dealing with from a source of tax law perspective. All right, so a client letter is a little bit different than a research memo. Remember, a client letter is going to the client, okay? So you need to start it out with the appropriate salutation, right? You need to give them a summary of results and the objective of the research. Now, you're going to give them a summary of critical sources. You're not going to write this as technical or as technically as a research memo. All right, so you're still going to need to give them your sources, but you're not going to be as technical in your writing, okay? And then finally, some general points about business communication, all right? So typically, main points in the first paragraph. Let them know what you're writing about, okay? Define your purpose, stick to it, don't wander. Keep it simple, okay? Don't use filler language, don't use jargon, don't use cliches, don't use slang, all right? Just because you can text it doesn't mean it should be written in an actual letter, all right? Follow the 10-80-10 rule, okay? So what that 10-80-10 rule is 10% of the space and time should be on the introduction, 80% of the space and time should be on the body of the communication, and then 10% of your space and time should be on the conclusion, okay? Obviously, revise, read it, reread it, edit, okay? You do have to, when we're talking about something for a client, be careful about the amount of time you spend. You want to be efficient with your time because you don't want to increase your billable hours just to, wordsmith multiple iterations, okay? Use social amenities. We've already talked about reviewing carefully, okay? So this should give you kind of a frame of mind for what we're going to do in class on September 9th. So in class on September 9th, we're going to get into the research databases, and we are going to look at some issues and make some conclusions and start actually putting some of this on paper. All right, I will talk to you guys soon.